Thank you guys for joining me for another episode of Keeping It Real with America's Supermom. I'm excited to have my next guest. I have Maria here, and we were kind of doing a little, how did we get connected? Trying to figure it out behind the scenes. But we have a mutual connection with Janice Porter. So we want to give her a shout out, say, hey, Janice, I miss you. But we're going to have a great conversation getting to know each other and seeing what's going on in her neck of the woods because she's in Canada. But before we get started with that, I want to give her the opportunity to introduce herself.
Well, thank you, Chanel. And I am so excited to be here with you because you're, basically, I've heard so much about you.
Oh,
And so it's also amazing. And I'm in awe of you, of course, because I know everything that you do, and you are a super mom. I know you were called America's super mom, but I think even in your own life, you would still be a super mom.
oh, thank you so much. I sure appreciate that.
Well,
Those are the things that I want to keep and playing for myself, when my kids get to fussing and arguing. You know what I'm saying?
definitely, right? Yeah, so I am a mom of two. I mean, my oldest son passed away 12 years ago, and I'm also a grandma of one.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that's where I started to pivot in the
Mm-hmm.
sense of grief does a lot in your life that you do not expect. I mean, and realistically, no one can prepare you
Yeah.
for anything like that. And no matter how many books you read or anything like that afterwards, it's a journey that is very isolating.
Mm-hmm.
It's very lonely at times. And I know for myself, having gone through that journey and now being on the other side, and I'm using the word other side loosely,
Right.
is wanting to help other women. Because I look back and I'm thinking, I wish I had someone that could
Mm-hmm.
tell me what was myth, what could I expect, what kind of
Mm-hmm.
feelings would be coming up,
Mm-hmm.
what my physical body was going through. Because I don't think in any books, no one ever mentions what you're going physically. Right? They talk sometimes
Mm-hmm.
about the emotions. They talk about your mental health, but no one really says how your body starts to break down.
Wow. That's just, I'm sorry for your loss, first off. And thank you so much for sharing and having the transparency because I'm sure with what you do every day with the people you help, you realize that you're definitely not alone, even though that is a hard situation to experience. So, for people that are watching, um, I guess the first question is what happened, for everything, how it transpired, and, what would you tell them today for those that it may be fresh to?
Mm.
What is the most important thing that would be the first thing you would tell them?
The first thing I would say is to understand that grief is a roller coaster. There isn't um, anything that, because you're going to be dealt with so many emotions. Like basically, all of a sudden, you are just, you have all these emotions, but yet you feel empty. So you're almost like an empty
Mhm.
shell. Um, and I used to call myself, afterwards, a zombie. And I would go,
Mhm.
I wonder if that's where those movies were about. Really, it's about
Mhm.
mothers or fathers, of course, who are grieving because you're a body that's walking, but you're
Mm.
empty inside, right? You're going through the motions of life, but you're not fully present.
Mm. That is just, I resonate with that so much. And you know, that is definitely something that a lot of people experience. My journey was with depression,
Mm.
but that is so resoundingly loud and clear for me that That's part of what happened in my journey. So, how did you get to the point of transitioning from this zombie experience to where you are now and adding so much value in the lives of others and just being able to have the conversation?
Yes, it took me many years to get here. And what I ended up finding, because at the beginning, I was more concerned about how am I going to deal with my emotional and mental state, because I wasn't thinking of my body. But what I found was I found products that actually helped me with my body. And so what they did is they actually made my cells in my body come alive. And because my cells were coming alive, my body was actually telling me, you got to start taking care of us, got to start taking care of me. And through that, it was almost like then it propelled me of going forward in the sense of saying, you know what, like I need to start getting healthy for me.
Mm.
And then once your body has settled down, all of a
Mhm.
sudden it's a little bit easier to deal with the emotions in the sense
Mhm.
of really understanding. And I think this is what I ended up finding is that I disregarded what people were telling me beforehand. Because what I found is that a lot of people were telling you myths in the sense of, I mean, they're wanting to be helpful, but really they're telling you that there's this stage, that stage, there's these steps.
Mhm.
Well, actually, I mean, whoever said that life was like a stage or a step?
Right.
It's not something that isn't. Life ebbs and flows, and that's
Mhm.
exactly what grief is. And as you said, anyone who suffered from a depression will understand. Yes, some days you're going to feel really good, but then there's going to be other days where you just feel this emptiness.
Mhm.
And it's also about honoring our feelings. I think society wants us to sort of brush everything aside, like brush
Mhm.
everything under the rug because they want
Mhm.
everything to be perfect,
Mhm.
right? If you look at it, um, there's a certain way that we need to look. There's a certain way that we need to feel. There's a certain way, all these things. And you're like, but life really doesn't go like that.
Mhm.
And I look at nature when you're looking at look at the different variety of trees, look at the different variety of flowers and everything else, and everything coexists.
Mhm.
And yet as a society, why is it that we're wanting to hide what the cycle of life is and
Mm.
hiding what people are going through? And I think that's where the openness is about. I mean, we're starting to get better in regards to mental health, right? People
Mhm.
are coming out and sharing their stories
Mhm.
because it really is about there's so many people that are affected but are hiding.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean that is you're bringing up some very great points about, this whole thing. Life is not linear. It definitely is zigzag, Someone said that if your heart is flatline, you're dead. It should be up and down, up and down. That's what life should be looking like. So I thought that was really a good way of looking at it. But so many lessons that many people can glean from the things that you're saying, the whole piece about society and the idea of perfectionism and, you know, um, how we should look in the eyes of others and not really addressing the real realities of what we're feeling or
Mhm.
feeling like, we're a burden if we do bring some of these things up that we may be struggling with. So, with that being a real problem or a real issue, how were you able to navigate through that? Because many people are in that place.
And it is. There's I mean, as with anything, we're always going to deal with things differently because we are unique. Two people can have their child die of the same thing, but again, you're going to go the journey differently because we're a unique person. Our relationships would have been different with our
Mhm.
child, so there's always that. But it really comes down to, I think, afterwards, is about wanting to move forward. And I don't mean by moving forward that you are going to forget, um, or that you don't know what's happening. I mean, in the sense of not to sort of forget your memories, because those are always
Mhm.
going to be there. The child that you lost will always be with you.
Mhm.
Um, and when we understand that grief is going to be a lifetime, it's not
Mhm.
going to be, uh, and I think this is where sometimes the myth kind of goes, is because when it first happens, you're going to have people that are going to be very sympathetic with you. They're going to
Mhm.
offer your condolences. Year one, starting to get into year two, all of a sudden people are going to say, "Oh, you're still grieving." Year five, it's kind of like, "Oh, you're still not over it." And I always say, this isn't a pair of shoes that I lost.
Mhm.
It's my child and it doesn't matter whether you knew your child for one day,
Mhm.
for 20 years, for
Mhm.
50 years. As a
Mhm.
mother, it's still going to be your child.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the aspects, there's always going to be that bond. And
Mhm.
so it will be a lifetime that you're going to miss. It's just afterwards, you want to do something that's going to honor their memories, but
Mhm.
also realize that you're still here in this world.
Mhm.
And so, what are you going to be doing that is going to bring you hope?
Mhm.
What dreams are you going to start building? Whether it's a legacy to remember for your
Mhm.
child, to help other people that have gone through the same thing as you. If they died of a disease, are you going to be fundraising or bringing attention to it?
Mhm.
When you're looking back, there are people who have started movements and laws that have
Mhm.
changed when their child something happened, right?
Mhm.
They've used that energy.
Mhm.
And really that's what it's about is, I mean, I look at it going, none of us really know how long we're going to live here.
Right.
um, as a parent, we always think that we will, you know we will out our children will outlive us.
Mhm.
Granted, my son had cancer. He had leukemia. So,
Mhm.
yes, the knowing was there that eventually he would pass, but
Mhm.
that's still not something that you're going to dwell on.
Right.
Right. And even when he did pass away, it was still a shock,
Mhm.
because it's one of those things that I always go, we got used to the cycle of cancer,
Right.
ups and downs of going
Mhm.
through that. And that became a way of life.
Mhm.
And that's what grieving is. All of a sudden, it's a new pivot, it's a new normal.
Mm.
And that is something where sometimes maybe you have to let go of other people that were in your life. Maybe some of these people are not your friends. And
Mhm.
so you may find yourself with a new circle of people that can
Mhm.
inspire you, that are able to listen to you. Because I
Mhm.
think that's really what's important, is that everyone wants to be listened and
Mhm.
everyone wants to be heard. And it
Mhm.
doesn't matter whether you've gone through a trauma or not. It's still a humanness that we all want from
Yeah.
everyone.
I love that. And I just think it's just such an inspiration that you're able to leave a legacy such as this and being able to help other people, with such a very sensitive and personal experience. And, my question is, how do you continue to stay um, energized or just have that momentum to keep doing it after, your own experience, because
Oh,
you have to be in a mindset. You know what I mean? Just like what you said, 5 years, people are like, you're still dealing with this. It's like a perseverance that you've got to
mhm.
have. So how do you do that?
Oh, and that is so true. And that's a very good, valid question. At 5 years, no, I would not be able to have done this even at year 10. Um, I got involved with a health and wellness company, which is who I'm with.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, and that's because, of course, they helped my body. So I love the company so much that I ended up joining them, and I'm an associate with the company.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also, I think, a message that I kept getting from God in the sense of, I think I was shying away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know how sometimes you're just getting these little nudges and you're kind of like, no, that's not me. I'm not ready for it. It's, go choose someone else.
Right.
Right? And
Mm-hmm.
it just kept in there. The voice just kept talking and it kept coming into my heart. And then when I found that, I totally surrendered and said, okay, this is my mission. This is my purpose.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, there was a lightness, right? It just seemed that, because I mean, even when my son passed away, I faith for me is very important.
Yeah.
And I kind of go, it was my rock. I always go, God is the one who surrounded me and held me
Mm-hmm.
during my brokenness. And if it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
for God, I don't know where I would be.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I'm kind of like, okay, now it's time for me to give back.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I'm walking this journey with God, and God is giving me the words of what to say.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that, I'm even designing a course to help women with grieving. And that's what I'm in the process of, is to say, you know what, I can design a course for women. So that way and it's not even a how-to. It's basically being there and going through my journey, but also having women talk about their journey, because
Mm-hmm.
it's through having them talk and having someone actually listen
Mm-hmm.
and understand where they're going. Because one of the things that I've learned is that when you've gone through a trauma, someone else can listen to you and they're listening, but they're not really hearing.
Mm-hmm.
When someone else has walked that journey, they may not have walked the same journey that you have walked, but they've walked that journey. So they totally understand
Mm-hmm.
of what you're going through. And also even the language. There is something that when you've gone through that journey, there are certain words that you know not to say, or of how to say it. And even sometimes by sharing some of the things that you think were quirky, that no one else would understand, they will get it.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are thoughts all of a sudden that have popped into your mind that you're like, oh no, what am I thinking? I mean, one of my thoughts was, oh, I was such a terrible mother. Um, and that's a huge disconnect between the heart and the mind.
Mm-hmm.
When you're dealing with cancer, actually, no matter how your child passed away, it is not your fault,
Mm-hmm.
right? There are circumstances, there are things beyond your control.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as mothers, we automatically think everything's in our control.
So true. Yeah.
It just is. I don't know if it's part of our DNA. Is it society? We think that I mean, and that's exactly what I had thought. If I could only breathe life into him, I could,
Mm-hmm.
that recitation sort of thing and just breathe. But we can't do that because we're not superhuman. You may be a super
Right.
mom, but we're not superhuman.
So true. And I'm just like, where do we get that from? Because it's not like, we have that philosophy passed down. It's not like some rite of passage where, your mom has the talk with you or something. I mean, but we all as mothers can identify with that. So that's just really profound that is that way.
Mm-hmm. And I have no idea where. You're
Mm-hmm.
right. Where did we get it? I mean, one of the examples that sometimes they use is that, when you're on the airplane and those oxygen masks
Mm-hmm.
come down, we are supposed to put it on ourselves first and then our children.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as a mother, what would we do? We would go and put it on everybody else, thinking, we don't need oxygen.
Right.
We're fine. We can be on this plane without oxygen.
Right. So true. So true. Yeah. So,
And that's something that I think, and all of a sudden when we're on the grief, all of
mm-hmm,
a sudden we have feelings of shame and guilt because
mm-hmm,
we couldn't save our child.
mm-hmm,
Um, and one of the things that I did share with someone else is and I apologize if anyone's Christian, so am I.
mm-hmm.
So,
I am too.
and I used to tell someone, and the Christian people were the worst.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's true, the truth. You know what I mean? These are some of the things that we just brush under the rug, like you said.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm,
And it's amazing. And I thought, if I hear one more time, give it to God if you only believed.
mhm.
And I'm thinking, you really have no idea what my relationship is with God. God has
Right.
walked beside me throughout my son's
Mhm.
cancer, throughout all of this. So I just thought, you really don't understand the thing about God. God doesn't stop things from happening.
Right.
And it's not about whether you're a good person or a bad person. We
Right.
all have goodness inside of us. And
Mhm.
I'll be the first one to admit, I also have some nastiness inside
Mhm.
of me. You
Mhm.
know, talk to some
Mhm.
other people. I'm sure they'll tell you I'm nasty.
Hey, and I'm right there with you. You know, it's so funny. I do a Facebook Live and I start out with the scripture and I'm like, look, I'm seeing the scripture for me. I don't know about you guys, but hey, I need to hear this word because, we do get caught up, and the Lord convicted me about that because whenever we read the Bible, it's like, oh, I'm Moses. We identify with the hero, the one that did everything right. And it's like, if we did everything right, why would we need the Bible? Why would we need to pray? So I really got humbled in that because I'm like,
Mm,
oh Lord, I've been sitting here putting myself on a pedestal instead of getting the message that God was trying to tell me so I can grow. So
yes.
yeah, I love that you mentioned that.
And it is. And it's funny because I remember, I think the year before my son passed away, I did have the opportunity to go to Israel. And if no one's ever gone, I would say go.
Yeah.
The Bible comes to life.
Wow.
Right. And I remember texting my son and all these things. And he'd text me back going, Mom, please come back the same.
He's probably thinking, hey, she's gonna come back walking on water. Okay.
Right. And it really did. And it's funny how all of a sudden, because sometimes I'm, like you read and then it's like, I don't understand this. And then I'm
Mhm.
realizing that I'm using it for today's time. And the Bible is really not, I mean, it is meant for today's time because there's
Mhm.
messages in there. There's always messages. But
Mhm.
we take things sometimes so literally that
Mhm.
we really miss the point of what they were living back then. And
Mhm.
what did it mean for back then and how does it translate?
Mhm.
But the overlying message I always got was God is love.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, you know what? I don't know what happens around the world. And sometimes I always go, God, hopefully by the time I get there, you'll explain things to me because I
Mhm.
certainly don't know. And we can have this conversation of why you allowed this and that.
Right.
Um, but if you have that thing that God is love, and that's the love that we should give to every human being, because that's what
Mhm.
it says, is that when you're looking at another human being, you
Mhm.
are supposed to be seeing yourself or you see God there.
Amen. Yeah. So true. That's a great point. I love that. And now you mentioned something really profound about, you were doing the emotional piece, but you still had an issue with your body. So what is it that we're getting wrong with that? And what was it that came up for you to help you realize that that was an issue?
I was actually getting body pains. I never
Mhm.
had body pains beforehand. And all of a sudden, I couldn't even be touched. I mean, even giving me a hug just made my body ache.
Wow.
Um, just having someone just tap me, and all of a sudden it was like, ouch. So I was having body aches, body pains, um, just a whole lot of things about it breaking down. I mean,
Mhm.
Of course, you always feel exhausted because when you're going through something traumatic,
Mm-hmm.
it exhausting. You really have restless sleep. You don't sleep at
Mm-hmm.
all. So it becomes all of that. And I think then, of course, for depending on, you either don't eat or you overeat, and you really don't really look at what you're eating. So you're not even looking at what nutrition is or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that. And it's just because there's even because broken heartness is actually a physical, um, there is actually a physical aspect where you almost feel like you're having heart attacks.
Wow.
Yeah, I found that one out. But you do. And I actually had never been anxious beforehand. And
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden I had anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So all these things that I didn't have just showed up,
Mm-hmm.
right? I started being afraid
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, of different things. So it's like here I was beforehand, a confident, strong woman. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
was my son's advocate for so long.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it was like a 360 where you're just afraid of doing anything. You're afraid of even your own, I don't want to say shadow, but of even making any choices because you don't know if it's the correct one. Like it just slow thinking. I mean, emotionally, I knew because I had my other son that afterwards it was kind of like I needed to start working on myself. And I think that's where I
Mm-hmm.
started working on myself emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
thinking, if I don't if I'm just dwelling on the son that I lost, what am I saying about my surviving child?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I totally understand because dynamics of families then change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone deals with grief differently.
Mm-hmm.
But again, everyone starts to look at the mother. What is the mother doing?
Right.
Right? No one really looks at what is the father doing,
Yeah.
right? It's like, what is the mother doing? And again, it's almost like everything's being back on your shoulders and you're kind of like, no, I can't deal with anything.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, what a profound truth. That is just so true. So, I guess, I mean, this is a great conversation, so rich and I just appreciate your honesty because for people watching, this can be a lifeline for them because this is not a conversation that you would have every day with just anybody. So I really appreciate that. So, for someone who is going through this time now, and they do have other children, what advice would you give them in that situation? Because, I'm sure it is hard to move on in one sense because it's like, what about the memory of the other? And, it's kind of like, if you don't acknowledge it, you feel like maybe you're pushing that under the rug. I mean, it's this, hard situation to be in. So what advice would you give them?
Yeah, you'd have to make time for the other child,
Mm-hmm.
and also see what emotions that they're feeling. I mean, for my other son at the time, he was 26 because my oldest son who died was 27 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does it mean that he didn't feel left out? Yes, I'm sure he did. And so I guess depending on the age that they're at, it's
Mm-hmm.
about, can they talk to you? I mean, the younger they are, I think sometimes you can share your feelings and maybe get them to share your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Once they become more of an adult, they may not want to share with you. So whether they see a counselor or not, of seeking professional help, one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that I did was I also did a photo album. And
Mm-hmm.
so the photo album, I would just choose photos of where they were together.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that way he would have his own photo album of him and his brother.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that way that was his way.
Right.
Um, and one of the things, I mean, I was one of these women that beforehand didn't want family photos in my home.
Wow.
Right? Beforehand, it was kind of like I love pictures, I love paintings. I just didn't want any family photos. Don't
Mm-hmm.
ask me why, I just never did. All of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, my son died, family photos came up.
Wow.
And so it was kind of like, and then I had to make sure that I had both boys there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's not about a shrine to the one
Mm-hmm.
that's lost. It's you
Mm-hmm.
want to have that they're both important.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I've learned is that I made mistakes beforehand of how I did things. Even my son came up to me and go, "Why did you do this?" And you do things without thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your thought process all of a sudden goes, I don't know, a little bit wonky.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so someone else, and it's funny because someone else then looks at it and assumes something, and then sort of that rumor starts, and that can start
Mm-hmm.
building up family dynamics. Well, someone will go, "Oh, your mom did this and that. I think she cares for that person more." But you do
Mm-hmm.
things without really thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
think everyone needs to understand that. I mean, if you can sort of step back before you do an action, but sometimes, let's face it, we do actions and it's thoughtless.
Yeah.
And when you're in grief, sometimes it can even be more so. I mean, I get that other people will have thoughtless comments, but sometimes you're kind of like, you know what? It's better to say nothing. Like, I think that's what I'd like to give the advice for other people. If you
Mm-hmm.
know someone
Mm-hmm.
who suffered grief, don't say anything. Just kind of
Mm-hmm.
be there for them. Ask if they need anything, but
Mm-hmm.
don't give any comments about you'll get over this. They're in heaven.
Right.
We don't want to hear it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah. So I just appreciate your sharing because this has been so helpful, I'm sure, for many of our viewers. So, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you? And I'm thinking that health business people without grief might need that right about now with
Oh, definitely.
the pandemic. Okay. I'm just saying. Okay.
Oh, it's the one thing, and it's amazing because I've been taking my supplements.
Mm-hmm.
It's the one thing that I was kind of like, yeah, that's okay. I feel secure in
Mm-hmm.
my immune system, which is
Mm-hmm.
really good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it's about. It's about being healthy. And yes, so people can reach me through email,
Mm-hmm.
mariabelanic8
Mm-hmm.
at gmail.com. Right?
Awesome.
And send me a message. And definitely, we can chat about grief or about your health.
Love that. Well, this has just been so wonderful. And I want to give you the opportunity to share any final thoughts that you might have with the audience today.
Yeah, final thoughts is really take care of yourself and honor yourself, and understand that it's a roller coaster. Maybe not so much a roller coaster, but an ocean. Think
Mm,
of the emotions as being an ocean of where it's going to be this flow and ebb of a tide. It's going to come
mm,
in and out, and honor those feelings and listen to your body,
mm,
right? Because at times when we need to rest, then do so. And if it's a moment that you need to take because you're feeling overwhelmed, then just be in that moment. Because I think a lot of times we are just wanting to push it aside and we're not honoring ourselves. And that's really what it's about. Um, we can be strong women, but strong women, we understand our weaknesses and of honoring ourselves. And I think that's what we really need to do. Our strengths are actually in our weaknesses.
so true. Well, thank you so much. And I encourage everyone watching to share this video. This is a great conversation for many people that may be experiencing grief right now, especially if it's a hard topic that maybe you don't feel comfortable about, but you can just share the information. It could be a lifeline for them. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments, and we will be sure that Maria gets them. And again, Maria, we just thank you so much for having this conversation and really appreciate you for being here because this has added so much value for the audience to enjoy.
Well, I thank you for having me on as a guest. I really appreciate it. Um, I know you're an amazing woman, so
Oh,
thank you so much for inviting me.
you are so welcome. Well, everyone watching, we want to thank you so much for your time, for leaning in on this conversation. And again, reach out if you have any questions. And we look forward to seeing you all on the next episode. Bye for now.